Hi, and welcome to episode 59 of the Breaking Bio podcast. I'm Morgan Jackson, a PhD student at the University of Guelph in Ontario, Canada.
I'm Stephen Hamlin, postdoc at the University of New South Wales in Sydney, Australia.
And today we're joined by Dr. Justin Gregg, who's a research associate at the Dolphin Communication Project in the Netherlands. Justin, welcome back to the podcast, seeing this is actually your second time. Nobody will remember the first time because Google actually ate the recording as soon as we did it. But welcome back to the podcast. You want to tell everybody a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, indeed, I'm a research associate with the Dolphin Communications Project, studying dolphin social cognition and dolphin communication, which is understandable given the title. And yeah, I completed my PhD in 2008, and then I wrote a book that we're going to talk about today on dolphin intelligence.
Exactly, and that book is titled Are Dolphins Really Smart? And subtitled The Mammal Behind the Myth, and I'm sure we're going to get into this, and seeing Stephen, I could just tell that he's got all sorts of questions regarding the intelligence, or pseudo intelligence perhaps, of dolphins.
Pseudo intelligence, all right. Actually, that's a good place to start because, I mean, I love the book, right? Like I finished it last night. It was very good. It was a great introduction to a lot of these topics for a regular audience, but it was very thorough, and I like that. One of the things I really enjoyed about it was your definition of intelligence, though, and this is something you don't see in a lot of publications about this. But you adopted a definition of intelligence, which may strike some people as odd. Can you tell us about it?
Yeah, well, I was thinking about what intelligence is and how most scientists define it, and they usually sort of circle around these definitions involving problem solving or flexible thinking or rational decision making, those sorts of things. But then I thought about intelligence as a whole, as we, like in the public, would normally think about it, and we talk about all sorts of stuff like self-awareness and the culture and tool use, and none of those really apply to that sort of narrow definition. And the only definition I could come up with that made any sense, that sort of incorporated everything we think about, was that intelligence is essentially asking how human-like another thing is, whether that thing is an animal or a robot or an alien. So how much its behavior resembles the behavior of an adult human. So that's the definition I used.
Which isn't to say that you think that that's a good definition.
No, it's absolutely terrible, really. I mean, it's not a scientific definition at all, but it is the one that makes the most sense when you think about intelligence, which itself isn't a very scientific idea, as we would understand it culturally.
Have you tried this definition out on a lot of people? Like, how do the people react to this sort of thing?
Yeah, other scientists, they totally understand where I'm coming from with using that definition, so they understand why it's necessary to sort of broaden it to the point, watering it down by comparing it to humans. But then some people say, well, it's so anthropocentric, and I say, yeah, that's exactly the point. When people usually compare animal intelligence, or do they talk about animal intelligence, they're really talking about how human-like the animal is. And I use that definition in the book to make the point that it's not a particularly scientific approach at all, although it's one that most everyone can relate to. And so pretty much everyone understands and appreciates that approach, and except for a couple people who say, you can't say that they're human. And then I say, yeah, that's totally my point.
Yeah, one of the things I actually noticed about the book is that if you're the type of person who doesn't like ambiguity, this book is really going to piss you off.
That's right.
Because a lot of the statements end up being, well, this all seems kind of reasonable to presume that dolphins can do X, but in reality we have no idea.
Yep, and that's the reality of science, especially the science of the animal mind, which is really just one of the hardest things to study with no real clear answers. And yeah, I have caught flack. People are like, well, he doesn't answer the question in the book. And so, 1 star on Amazon. He won't answer the question. But that's absolutely the feeling I wanted to give people, was that animal minds are so hard to understand. We don't really have clear answers, and that's what drives scientists to engage in this kind of science in the first place. So I was hoping it was sort of empowering as opposed to frustrating, but I know it's frustrating because I deal with it every day.
Well, that's part of the issue we face with communicating science is people want those easy answers. They want, the finished product, as it were. You see that all the time in, every new press release, scientists solve X, and the public loves that.
I've been battling that ever since the book came out, because it's frustrating, and I every time a headline comes up that says, "Oh, this guy says dolphins are stupid," And I say, no, 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 that's not what I said at all. It's much more complicated. No one wants to hear about complicated. They just want the headline, you know. So, yeah, me and science communication have had a strange love affair for the past 6 months.
Has there been a lot of dolphins are stupid?
Yeah, some headlines, yeah. The first ones that came out after the interviews of the book, they started running with that headline, and I fought back originally, and I said, no, you have to retract that, and that's not right. And so then I just was the guy who was battling journalists. And then I realized that no matter what I said, they were going to run with that headline, and there's nothing I could really do about it. And I even wrote something for the Wall Street Journal with this cool title, and it was all about this stuff in the book, the ambiguity. And then I saw it come up online, and it was like, oh, dolphins aren't so smart after all. And I'm like, oh, no, no, no. I'm like, don't run that headline. Use something that is more. And they're like, I'm sorry, buddy. That's the headline we're going with because that's the headline that people want to see. So you can blame it on the editor. I'm like, all right, I'll totally do that.
Yeah, I see a lot of that. Blame it on the editor.
Blame it on the editor, yeah. But it sells newspapers and it gets clicks. I absolutely understand it. You know, trying to do writing myself, I understand why those headlines are so enticing. It's just when it's in your own specific field, then you get all niggly about it. I'm like, no. We need more subtlety, everybody, more subtlety.
I really like the way you started off the book with the example of the chicken, because you take the first page and you list all these cognitive traits and social behaviors and such, and they go, oh, dolphins are awesome, and then you turn the page and it's the lowly chicken, and that was a great way to start it. But so you start off by really hammering at this idea of intelligence and it's whether we can use it as a concept. For viewers out there who may not be really well versed in this area, why is intelligence such a bad concept?
Really, because there isn't a particularly good definition for it. So you can't really base doing scientific inquiry unless you know exactly what it is you're looking for. And intelligence is such a loaded term. It has been to describe human intelligence, and it certainly has for animals as well, that there's really no answer to the question about what is intelligence. So in that sense, it's simply not helpful. You can talk about cognitive traits. That's much more interesting. Really specific things, how a visual system works, and you can compare that between two species. And that's really much more interesting. And what that doesn't have with it is a sort of value judgment. When you're comparing the visual system of an ant to the visual system of a bat, it's just saying, well, this can do this and this can do this, and there's no sort of good or bad or better. But when you talk about intelligence, it's always better. You have more intelligent species. This species is doing something much more intelligent than the other one, and there's this sort of value worth judgment, and that's the kind of thing I think doesn't really belong in this sort of science of comparative cognition.
Yeah, and people are really invested in that too. Like they get really emotional about the idea of dolphins being, these awesome creatures who are basically just us in flippers.
Yeah, and there's good reason for that. I mean, when I look at all the evidence we have about them, they are strangely primate-like in what they do. They do a lot of things that you see in chimpanzees with their complex societies and their ability to manipulate symbols and things in the lab. So yeah, I think there's a good argument you can make saying that they are unexpectedly chimpanzee-like, which is kind of cool, and people are interested in that. But who's to say being like a chimpanzee is really all such a big deal? It is for us, because we're like chimpanzees too, but...
But there's also, there's some things which dolphins actually do fairly poorly on, which can be surprising.
Yeah, there are a couple things that they don't do well, which are strange, because we would have expected them to do, like the object permanence task. I think I mentioned that in the book, where you hide something under a bucket, and then you move the bucket, and then you ask the dolphin, where is it? And the act of moving the bucket somehow confuses the dolphin or confuses its visual system, and it doesn't know where it is. And a lot of other species, primate species and bird species, will pass that test. And you would expect dolphins to as well, but they don't. And so you can say, well, that's because they don't have that ability, or you can say, well, that's because somebody screwed up the experimental design, which is probably the answer.
That's actually a good point, because one of the odd things that I really learned about this, I'd always, read stuff about dolphins and assumed that because of all the attention paid to them, there was a really deep, set of literature on this. But in some cases, you point out that a lot of these conclusions are based on experiments like 2 dolphins back in the 60s. And where does that come from? Like,
sometimes I just don't know. Like, for example, memory. People often say dolphins have a great memory, but if you look at the number of memory tests, dolphins, there's maybe 1 or 2 that have ever been done. Only one very recently, since the book came out, that shows that they have a fairly good long-term memory. But it's really not enough to make a statement like dolphins have great memory. So I don't know how that creeped in there, other than we just assume that they're smart, so they should have a good memory. But a lot of it does come from early 60s experiments, which weren't very good, which led people to get very excited about dolphin intelligence, and that sort of stuck culturally. And later on, 50 years later, we found out that some of that stuff is true. They really are good at symbol use, etc. And some of it didn't really hold up to scrutiny.
Well, you bring it up now, and I think it's as good a point as any to jump in. Is the, I guess, the good and the seemingly bad that John Lilly brought to the field, and how his work, I guess, from what I can tell from reading your book, both inspired the field and damned it to 60 years of patiently trying to explain why it was horrible at the same time. How is the field recovering from Lilly, and can you explain a little bit to those that haven't read the book who John Lilly was and why his work is such an impact?
Yeah, John Lilly was a medical doctor interested in neurophysiology, and he started out working on primates, just doing brain mapping stuff. And he was one of the first people to really look at the dolphin brain and start measuring it. And he was the one who noticed how darn big it was and how it was complicated in terms of having all this cortical folding and ththings. So he started doing tests in the late 50s, and later in the early 60s he got a lot of money to conduct experiments. And his sort of conclusion was these animals have huge brains, bigger than human brain. They might have a capacity for language based on their ability to communicate with each other, and they seem to have good control over their emotions. And so he wrote a book about this, Man and Dolphin, in 1961, which became a huge hit culturally, for the public. And that was followed up by book after book over the next 20, 30 years. And so he sort of introduced the idea of dolphins being super smart, not just a little bit smart, but maybe smarter than humans even. And those ideas stuck culturally. They inspired a lot of scientists as well, but they weren't really based on scientific evidence at the time. We didn't really know that much about it, so it was pure speculation. And 50 years later, we find that some of it is true, some of it is not true, but John Lilly is still sort of revered in the public as a sort of pioneer.
Yeah, there was a throwaway in the book which I found really fascinating about how Lilly was at a meeting in Virginia, I think it was, about SETI, and they ended up forming this I don't know, club or association, you call it, the Order of the Dolphin.
That's right.
Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, he was invited to join with this group of Frank Drake was there, Carl Sagan, a bunch of other pioneers in astrophysics who were really interested in learning more about the solar system and hopefully contacting aliens. And then, of course, if you did contact aliens, how would you communicate with them? That was their big question. So John Lilly was brought in because he was the man trying to communicate with dolphins, which are the alien intelligence here on Earth. And they were really quite intensely interested in what he had to say. So that's why they ended up calling themselves the Order of the Dolphin, sort of named after him. And they would send each other these secret coded messages to see if they could decode these alien like messages. So they were super into Lilly at the time, and so was Carl Sagan, actually. And he went and visited Lilly a bunch of times at his lab in St. Thomas, and they formed a bit of a friendship. And Sagan was always trying to get Lilly to conduct experiments that were more rigorous and things, and Lilly was not into that. So they sort of parted ways after that. Well, yeah, that was the meeting that established SETI and the Drake equation, which is the one that estimates the probability of alien life and that sort of thing. So it was an important meeting.
I just imagine them having all little badges, Order of the Dolphin, you know.
I know,
makes me happy.
But secret flipper handshake.
Oh yeah,
exactly. Yeah, and he was, Lilly was in contact with the CIA and all these sort of high-level meetings with the president because they were interested in using his communication abilities to do mind control and all sorts of other stuff. So he was sort of big up in the government, like doing all this conspiracy stuff at the time. That's why, one of the reasons people took him so seriously. If a guy is up talking to the president about secret missions in Asia, then gosh, we better start listening to him.
didn't they write a book on somebody like that, the man who stares at goats or something?
Oh yeah, I read that book, the John Ronson book. That is just
Yeah.
crazy. I couldn't even believe that was not fiction. It was crazy stuff. But yeah,
that was
that's
another
the U.S.
like
military.
CIA program. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Didn't the U.S. Navy train dolphins at one point?
They do. They still do. They have a marine mammal program which they've had
Still do.
since the 60s. Yeah. So dolphins were used to sniff out mines and sometimes to patrol areas to guard from enemy divers. People always said, well, they've also trained the dolphins to attack enemy divers with these knives on their heads and that sort of thing. But rather unexpectedly, the U.S. Navy says, no, we never did that sort of thing. So that's one of these things we don't know. Depending on which conspiracy theorist you speak to.
There's no laser dolphins running around?
No, although there was one there was a story from the Black Sea. I don't know if you remember that one, because you had the old Soviet dolphins that did the same thing, and then now they're used for therapy. And someone said, oh, they've escaped. These military dolphins have escaped in the Black Sea, and they're armed. They have guns attached to their head, and they're going to kill people on the beach. And so it was a big deal. It was a hoax in the end.
You know, that's along the lines of some of the stuff you end up skewering in the book. Things like the ideas that dolphins are just completely peaceful, and they're basically a big hippie society under the water, or that they have language which we don't really know and doesn't seem to be all that plausible. Are you getting a lot of pushback on these sort of things?
I'm not actually, not from the people who really truly believe that sort of stuff, because I don't think they'd be interested in my kind of book or talking with someone like me. But there are a lot of New Age beliefs which aren't based on science, nor were they ever intended to be based on science. Like I mentioned in the book, the conference in Hawaii where the dolphins were going to transport people to Mars. I don't know if you came across that part. Like that was an actual thing. Like it was advertised in the seminar program. It's like, yeah, swim with the dolphins. They'll transport you back in time. You can watch the signing of the Declaration of Independence, and then you can go to Mars and that sort of stuff. And people honestly, truly believe that sort of stuff. So, but I haven't heard from those folks because I actually didn't address that stuff too much in the book. My publisher was like, it's like, this is a science book. This is for science people. They already know you can't transport yourself to Mars, so we don't have to address that stuff. I'm like, okay. So.
Yeah, I was disappointed to see you didn't deal with dolphin-assisted birth.
Yeah, I've blogged about that sort of stuff, but I did leave it out of the book because it's some people just find it too unscientific, and there's lots to be said about dolphin-assisted birth, obviously. But I mean, a lot of these people are very well-meaning people. They're just not interested in the science. So there's no point in beating them over the head with a science stick because they're not interested. So I didn't feel the need to really go out and attack people's ideas like that.
So for people at home who haven't actually heard of it, can you tell us about dolphin-assisted birth? Because I find it hilarious. I'm not going to lie.
Yeah. The idea is that dolphins are very interested in people, and they're also very interested in pregnant ladies, and they're also very interested in helping pregnant ladies give birth. So if you go out in the ocean when you're ready to give birth, supposedly the dolphins will come around you, and they'll help you push the baby out or push it up to the surface. I'm not really sure. But the evidence is that a dolphin or a human that has been born this way will have extra superpowers. It'll be better at holding its breath, or it'll mature more quickly. Depending on who you listen to, like they'll be able to hold their breath for half an hour or whatever. All sorts of things. So some well-meaning people are really big into this, and so they've tried to go out in different places and give birth in the wild with dolphins. But as far as I know, it's never happened. I've had lots of people contact our organization to ask us to help them set this up. We always advise against it. We say, it's probably not a good idea. There are things like sharks. Sharks really enjoy things like body fluid and blood, things that you'll be leaking out during the birth, and then you have a small bite-sized infant. It just doesn't seem like the world's greatest idea.
Knacky.
In the end, no one does it for logistic reasons, I think.
And because you guys aren't stupid enough to let them.
Well, we wouldn't bring them out on our boats, I don't think.
I don't know. I think you're missing a great way to fund your research. As long as you have the proper waivers.
If I wanted to fund my research with stuff like that, I'd be a millionaire. But no, I'm the skeptic, and nobody pays skeptics. That's why I still eat ramen noodles.
Actually, while we're in that area, can you tell us a little more about the Dolphin Communication Project and what you guys do there?
Yeah, we research dolphins in their habitat, so we don't conduct any experiments. It's all observational. We've got this underwater camera with two hydrophones off it, so we record video and audio. And so we go into all sorts of different sites. We have a wild site in the Bahamas with spotted dolphins, and then a couple captive facilities that we also go swim with the dolphins. They aren't trained to do anything. We just sort of watch them. And there was also out in Japan a wild site. That's where I was for 3 years. And so then we just get all these data that have been collected using the same protocol so we can make comparisons. And we study their vocalizations, but we also study the way they rub each other with their pectoral fins. That's what I've been studying recently to see how they use that as a communication signal. Much in the same way that chimpanzees might groom each other, we think dolphins are rubbing each other with their pectoral fins as a kind of communication.
You know, communication is a good point because you spend a bit of the book on that in terms of communication, language, you know, all of the ideas that we have about dolphins and animal communication in general. Can you tell the viewers at home, nobody's live, but the viewers at home a little more about it?
Yeah, well, what's interesting with dolphins is because of John Lilly, who was really quite convinced that dolphins had a language in the sense of human language, so that could communicate about complex, arbitrary things. You know, anything humans can think of, we can sort of convey to each other using these vocal symbols. And he thought dolphins did the same thing. He was quite convinced of it, so he spent his career looking for it. And a lot of people, because of that, also believe that dolphins, unlike dogs, for example, or chimpanzees, have a language. So a lot of research has been built in trying to either teach them a language or to decipher their communication. We also study communication where, in my group, although we're not focused on language at all. So I've got a whole chapter sort of dedicated to this dolphin language thing. And the conclusion is really, we don't know that much about dolphin communication, but there's nothing in there at the moment that is really hinting at language like human language. It's more similar to all the other kinds of animal communication we currently know about.
Which is the kind of the problem, because that statement, while true and admirable, also leaves just enough gap that people slide in and say, "Oh no, but we just haven't detected it."
Yep, there's a whole group of people who say, "Oh, that's just because we haven't decoded it yet." And I have some friends and colleagues who are really quite convinced that it's just in there. We don't have the right tools. Our computers aren't fast enough. And that someday we'll discover it. And I always say, well, why do you think that about dolphins, but not marmosets, or pick an animal? And the reason they do is because of the cultural ideas, I think, from John Lilly. We've had for 50 years this idea of dolphin language, but if you just look at the data, it's not that different between dolphins and any other species. So the belief is really based, I think, a lot of the time more on the cultural ideas than the science. But yeah, there's always room to sneak in the, oh yes, they have a language.
You know, I was just watching a TED Talk by Denise Hensing.
Denise Herzing, right? Yeah.
Herzing, yeah. And I was actually struck by that right at the beginning, because she stands up and in front of the sympathetic crowd and she says, well, you know, dolphins have big brains and they have, complex social behavior, and kind of basically implies that because of that, they're super intelligent and, must be, she's in the water dealing with them because they must be that intelligent. And one of the things I really liked about the book was you put it in larger context and kept pointing out things like, well, yeah, you think all of that is great, but chickens do that too, or, insects do a lot of these things, or, all of these various links that put it in a broader context.
Yeah, I mean, if you sort of add up all the stuff that dolphins do, they do a fairly large variety of cool primate-like stuff. So people make the argument, well, they do have the big brains and the complex social systems, and they're very primate-like, so therefore they are more likely to have language than other species. And I sort of take that out of the book and I say, yeah, well, if we look at brains, or if we look at their behavior, if we look at their community, we find there's lots of other species doing something similar, so there's no reason to pull dolphins and put them at the top of the list. And I'm sympathetic to their arguments a lot of the time. Dolphins do all the special stuff, so they might be more likely to have language. I'm not particularly convinced by it, and I think the past half of trying to teach dolphins English or other symbols or decode their communication to find language, and we have failed, probably tells us something.
All right. Well, at this point, I actually have to switch gears because if I don't, my wife is probably going to kill me.
Okay.
Because you, besides being a dolphin researcher, you actually have another kind of side gig which you do, which is voiceover work and animated stuff. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I used to do a lot more voiceover work. That was when my wife was working on her PhD, and I had to put meat on the table. So I went out and did voiceover work. So I recorded cartoon voices and some movie stuff, and yeah, that was my income. And I think that's great fun. I mean, it's great to talk about dolphins and get a PhD and run around being a scientist, but it's also a lot of fun to pretend to be a cartoon character. So I'd love to keep doing that.
Are you still doing that?
Every now and then. I don't have that much time, but if someone called me up and said, "Hey, you want to come record a movie?" I'd do it in a heartbeat. Plus, it pays way better than writing science stuff.
Money. Yeah. You're not supposed to want money, are you? But
no, I'm not supposed to want money. That's true.
Yeah. So can you just for the people at home who don't know how this works, can you tell a little bit about how voiceover work actually happens, like what you do for it?
Yeah, if they're making a new movie, for example, they'll give you the script, and then you as the voiceover artist go in the studio with a giant microphone. Like, let's see this giant microphone. It's my giant voiceover guy microphone. It's bigger than my head. Anyway, and,
in a world gone mad.
Yeah, that guy. I can't do that guy's voice though. I still have a geeky guy voice. So I'm always like playing a 15-year-old geek as opposed to some 40-year-old guy. But anyway, so you have the script, and you have to read out the script and make it sound totally believable. And there's nobody else in the room with you, so there's no one reading dialogue against you. So you have to make it all up, and you know, you'll get crazy direction from the director in the booth. Who'll be like the Thor movie I did. They'd be like, "Okay, you're Thor now, and you're 16, but this old woman puts a spell on you, and you transform into an 80-year-old man. So make the sound of a 15-year-old transforming into an 80-year-old man." And you're okay. So you have to do that for a while. And I think that's a lot of fun. And sometimes you can see a picture of what your animation character is going to look like, and sometimes not. And then later on, you have no control over the process. 2 years later, the film comes out, and you see a little guy running around on screen talking like you. It's fantastic.
Yeah, that's something that I don't think a lot of people really understand about animation. You know, that the voices usually precede the animation and inform it to a large degree. Which is why Disney's well known for this, picking voices that are going to be good for the characters.
Yeah, and they often come in and they'll film you while you're doing the thing. So like if you have like funny eyebrow movements or a weird mouth movement when you say something, sometimes they'll incorporate that into the character. And sometimes the character is made to look like the person, especially if they're famous. Yeah, that's how most films are made. And later on, sometimes if you're dubbing a film, like if you have a film that's originally in German and then I have to do the English for it, you'll see the film on screen and you have to match up the lip movements to your movements. That's really quite difficult.
Oy, that'd be really hard. So you avoid the old kung fu movie syndrome?
You always get it. It's inevitable. And sometimes it looks terrible. Like someone will be making some long like "oh" face, like "oh," and you have to say a whole word in that, like "oh," and it never fits, and it looks ridiculous. But you can't get around it.
That's awesome. Unfortunately, we're pretty much out of time now. So where can people follow along with your research with the Dolphin Communication Project, future work with your books, and perhaps even catching up with some of your animation voiceovers?
Yeah, the Dolphin Communication Project is online at dolphincommunicationproject.org. And then I'm online doing bloggy stuff at justingregg.com, and I'll also have updates about new books or other crazy animation that I get up to. Hopefully someone's watching this and they're going to cast me in a movie, Disney, and then I'll be rich and famous. But yeah, justingregg.com, that has all the information.
Awesome. Well, we'll make sure that we put those links up on our website, which you can find at home by searching for thebreakingbio.com. You can also find us on Twitter at BreakingBio, and you can search for us on Facebook as well by searching for the Breaking Bio podcast. Until next time, I hope you'll have a great week, and don't go out talking for dolphins.